All right. And again, hello everybody and welcome. I'm glad you're here. We are working on the concept of a human mimicking robot, a robot that walks like a human being. And I have put together, this is a rendering in KeyShot of a series of stances that go through one cycle of walking with the right foot on the ground and the left foot is free, and then the left foot is on the ground and the right foot is free, and the left foot, when it was free, the left foot moved forward, and then when the right foot was on the ground, the left foot moved forward, and when the left foot was on the ground, the right foot moved forward. This is how human beings walk. And I've already mentioned what I call counterintuitive, where things are happening that you might not be aware of, or you might have in your mind how they're working, when actually they're not working like that. And I took this set of stances. I wanted to get behind the robots to look at them, and I made another one that's more spaced out. That's this one, and we'll take this one and make it disappear. And the reason for them being spaced out like that is so that you can get behind the robot. And I think that human beings, they have a conscious mind, which is what you're aware of, but there's a subconscious mind that includes your cerebellum, which sends out muscle control orders, and your vestibular system that tells you how you're balanced, and a lot of processing. So a lot of stuff is done by your brain, and it's not really telling you about that. And I think this is to keep you from getting confused. And one of the things I think your brain does for you, it's a gift from your brain. It tells you that the foot that's on the ground is not moving. And it really actually says the leg of the foot that's on the ground, that leg is also not moving. And the foot on the ground, with respect to the ground, isn't moving. But the foot on the ground with respect to the robot is moving, because the robot is putting the foot on the ground behind the robot, and the body of the robot is moving forward. And the leg connected to the foot on the ground, which your brain tells you it's not moving either, as a gift, a favor to you, so you don't get mixed up. That leg is actually moving with respect to the foot on the ground, and it's moving with respect to the robot. And you might go, well, so what? But the thing is, unless we have an AI, we give an AI permission to figure out how to get this robot to move from stance to stance. Now, it's very easy to get the robot to move from stance to stance. I've already shown you. You just write down the value of extension and retraction for all of these, which is not the same set of numbers as this one, and you just switch it from this one to that one. But there also will have to be modifications to take care of problems that come up with balance. And if we give that to the AI, it might come up with a kind of a conscious and subconscious form of processing. I don't think it will, but human beings have that. And I wanted you to know about that, because human beings have the foot that's not on the ground and the leg of the foot that's not on the ground. And they have the foot that's on the ground and the leg of the foot that's on the ground. And if we're going to program a robot to walk, we are going to have to pay attention to both of these legs and put out commands and instructions for them, even though we as humans, when we're walking along or thinking about our leg, we really are paying mostly attention to the leg that's and the foot that's free up in the air and can move around. In our world of thinking, this is what's moving. The other one isn't, even though in reality, they're both moving. And of course, we always want to switch out just for a second or two. And we we have our little robots here spaced out so we can get behind them and look at how they tilt. For example, when the robot has the right foot on the ground, you can see that the weight of the robot is over the right foot, and the right leg is adducted, alpha delta. It's adducted to bring the left foot under the middle of the robot, whereas the left leg is straight down. But I think we should just take a moment here and see lion cubs in Africa. I'm pretty sure this lion cub is saying, I don't actually care what you're talking about. And this one, it just seems to me the way this one is looking is saying, are you sure you know what you're talking about? I think I do. But anyway, that's kind of pretty, so I thought I would show it to you. That's the desktop. I did upgrade to Windows 11, and it seems to be working, which to me is a miracle. I've never changed the versions of Microsoft where it went well. So if it continues to be that it went well, then congratulations to Microsoft from me. And the other thing that we like to look at, and we'll go to that real quick. I always like to go back to this one just for a minute. I know you might remember that my mannequin robots put robot feet on their feet as stilts, I think, just playing. But I want you to know, I'm glad you're here. I am glad you're here. I hope you enjoy. I do have a YouTube channel. I have a website. And I have discussions about the robot. And of course, the other thing I like to always try to remember to talk about, anything that's physically real has a chance that it could hurt somebody. And if you're going to be managing a physically real item, it is my advice that you manage it in a manner that is legally allowed and reasonable and safe. And if you can't manage it in that way, my advice is do not create it as a physically real device. And these robots, for instance, made of metal, 6 feet tall, hydraulically operated, they really could hurt somebody if you didn't get your programming and your safety systems, your safety protocols straight. Anyway, so we try to remember to mention that. And I wanted to do just a little bit of some analytical work. We have the leg that is free, and that's a very important leg, and a very important foot. You can see the right foot as the robot walks along, the right foot is converted into the foot that is free, and the left foot is converted into the foot that's on the ground. And once the right foot is free, then you can see that the right foot can be swung forward. So the foot that's free and can move forward is very important, because the robot is not going to be able to move if it can't move one of its feet forward. And I think people intuitively understand that. I worry that the foot that's on the ground and the leg of the foot that's on the ground, that is going to be not fully understood and paid attention to. And the important thing about that foot is you can see, for example, let's see where we are here. The robot is on his right foot, and in order for him to get his weight or her weight to his left foot, he's got to move the body of the robot over. And one of the way that it can do this is to AB, alpha bravo, abduct this right leg. So it tries to move the foot that way, which it won't do because it's on the ground. But since you have the foot on the ground as a solid anchor point, the entire robot will move over to the left. And this is the point that I'm trying to make about the foot that's on the ground and the leg that's on the ground. The foot and the leg that are on the ground have the ability to move the whole robot around. And the one that's free and flying through space, it doesn't really do much to the robot. It can act as a balance item. But the other thing that is done by the foot that's on the ground, and we have the left foot here, is not only did it push the robot from left side to right side, and I've been trying to say the foot on the ground and the foot in the air, and I'm not saying right or left because it keeps switching. The foot that was on the ground, which was the left foot, becomes the foot that was on the ground, which is now the right foot, and they switch. But the foot that's on the ground, not only can it push by abducting and adducting the leg, it can extend the leg back. And when it extends the leg back, it pushes, again, it's on the ground. The left leg is on the ground. If the left leg extends, the foot doesn't slide along the ground. What happens is the body of the robot moves forward. So it's the anchor point of the foot on the ground that allows all of this to happen. And when we do our programming, we need to be aware of that. And of course, if you want to do the programming the way I'm suggesting it with stances, the stances will make that happen. And the reason I like a human mimicking robot and a leg of a robot that mimics a human is I think most people can look at these stances and say, well, if this is where you are right here, and you want to change it just a little bit in the direction of continuing the stride, then this should become that. And it's not like you have to get a piece of paper out and calculate anything. It's clear just by looking. That's an advantage. And this, where we are right now, is a kind of a high-level discussion. And I'm going to put together the concept of a spreadsheet where the rows of the spreadsheet are all of these hydraulic cylinders. My last count, I think there was 33 of them. So that's the rows going from left to right. And the columns of the spreadsheet are units of time, like 1 millisecond. And the cells of the spreadsheet are the values of extension and retraction of these hydraulic cylinders. And for example, if you're currently running through stance 15, the plan is to go to stance 16. It could be because of the sensory system detecting tilt and balance problems. It says 16 is going to have to be different from the normal 16 or the robot's going to fall down. And so you get 16 as modified. That's what I want to discuss. And then as the robot keeps walking and gets along and is back to stance 15, it may be the balance is fine. And this time the robot just uses the standard and normal version of 16. That's the point I wanted to make. And as we looked at the robot, I was just looking at these hips. Now, a human muscle, if you want to see a human muscle, get a moderately sized balloon and fill it with water. That's what a human muscle looks like. You can squeeze it and change it around, and the middle can be thin and the ends can be thick, and it can be wrapped around stuff. We're using hydraulic cylinders. They don't wrap around anything. And the reason why these hips are so wide is because I wanted the robot to have the range of motion of a human being in all respects. And that includes abduction, adduction. At the same time that you have abduction and adduction, you also have flexion and extension. And that's where these hips came from. And you might go, man, those are big hips. And they're swinging back and forth. And I wanted to do a discussion of that. I think we're going to go backwards in time and look at some obstetrics. That's my plan. When I said obstetrics, she looked at me, put her hands on her stomach, and I can just tell that she wasn't expecting that. But she's also pointing at the clock, which means I'm out of time. So we'll start obstetrics and some time travel with the next lecture. All right. And hello, everybody, and welcome. I was going to move away from just pure science and tell some stories. I thought that would be interesting. I remember I had the stances of the robot and I spaced them out so we could get behind it and notice what's happening as the robot switches its weight from one leg. You'll see how it's kind of tilted off to the right. And in order to move up the right leg, it has to, what I call, unweight it. And so in order to do that, it has to get its left foot on the ground, holding up the weight of the robot. And you can see that the center of mass of the robot is now close to the left foot. And I was looking from this view and noticed that the hips are wide, and I thought, but I know why they're this wide. They're this wide to get the range of motion. I think it's important for a human mimicking robot. I realize this is an interesting concept, that one of the things about a human mimicking robot is it probably should mimic a human. And that means it needs to have the range of motion of a human. And in order for this to work with hydraulic cylinders instead of human muscle, it needs to be this wide in order to get the abduction adduction. And I thought, well, is this bad or not? And it seemed to me maybe I should tell a story. I was thinking when I was telling a story that maybe I'll just go over some of my images while I'm talking. I found one. I had worked for a while on the deep knee bend, and I have an image of that, or I have a keyshot rendering of that. And I had been curious about the concept of the robot bringing itself into a deep knee bend. This is back when it didn't have arms, and I put the arms on it. And in terms of the electric motor gearhead system, if this is a 6-foot tall robot that weighs 200 pounds, and you want to do the standard human muscle movement, which means that this moves at 15 centimeters a second, I looked pretty carefully. I couldn't find an electric motor of this form factor with the forces that are required because of this leverage to bring this robot here. Well, it's pretty easy to bring it down into a deep knee bend. That's this set of images. But getting it back up again at 15 centimeters per second involves extending or sending a command for extension into these hydraulic cylinders to push them out and get the leg to extend. And I actually said that backwards because they're mounted behind. So they are actually retracting. And this one is also retracting because we're opening up this angle. But anyway, the amount of power to do that, I have not seen where it's available in an electric motor. And so I got to thinking about and one of the things that was intriguing to me is when I went over here to this little view of one of them standing up, they had their arms, and one of them in the deep knee bend. I just, particularly with these wide shoulders, I began to think, I have the problem of the fact that I drew it. So of course I'm going to think it looks good, but I wasn't seeing, it didn't seem so much to me anymore that the hips were too wide. And again, they are a little bit long anterior to posterior, front to back, but again, that's to give the flexion extension range of motion. And I was able to render an image. Keyshot will let me render an image at 12,000 pixels. And I'll let you take a look at that. And we got a couple of different versions. This this one is 7,000 pixels. This is 12,000 pixels. This is the one that's 101 megabytes. It's a PNG, 101 megabytes. And I like that because you can look at whatever you want to look at. And you can see you know, this foot is everted. The little toe is closer to the knee than the big toe. And you can also see that it's dorsiflexed, and this knee has been brought around. And again, first, I just have the problem that I drew it, so I think it's pretty, but this, to me, is a cool robot. It's pretty simple. It certainly doesn't have as many parts as the electric motor gearhead robots do. So I thought I would tell a story, and of course there's always some other stuff that we want to talk about. We always are just curious. Here we go. Let us see. Isn't that nice? It's a little house of way back in a village. I assume there are other houses around. It's exactly what I'm talking about this time. An olive grove in Italy. This is the Bing desktop. And we'll put the robots back. And I did, of course, I always want to show you this other image. Merch by Amazon asked me to create some images for pop sockets. And I created this lady, Whimsy Bling. And we want to, remembering to go back to our village. We're going to go back to 1700s or 1600s. In this village. And we have two people, a boy and a girl. Their houses were essentially almost next door. Maybe one house separated them. They grew up together since they were born. But at 3 or 4 years old, they began to remember a little bit of it. And they would run around and talk to each other and chase each other. They had toys they would play. He would take her toys and throw them, and she would get them. And he sometimes would throw them back and forth. Her father worked creating furniture. His father worked out in the forest cutting down trees, and sometimes they would get together and sneak out into the forest and watch his father. They thought that was a grand adventure. And the years went by. As it began to be 12, 13, 14 years, they became adolescents and teenagers and were filled up with hormones, which made them, of course, as always happens, completely crazy. And I will see if I can change my images around just for fun. My son asked me to render an image of a church. He was working to get that church rehabilitated. And Amazon lets me make t-shirts, so I made a little t-shirt. They were looking for funding. So anyway, these two teenagers, because their hormones showed up, went crazy and started being different people, and of course got mad at each other, because what else would happen? And she called him names and he called her names, and she thought that he didn't pay attention to her, and he thought that she was trying to do things that made him look bad, and they were yelling at each other. And she eventually said, "You should just go to another village. I don't think you should be here anymore. I don't like you." And he said, "Don't worry about it. I don't even notice you. I can't even see you when you're here. So it's like you don't exist." And that continued. They got to where he even went and got another girlfriend and would parade her around in front of this other girl just to make her mad. And a couple of years went by, and her house had a problem with the roof and a window, and she had to go on a ladder. He saw her looking at it. She clearly was scared, and he went over and said, "Well, I'll help you with it." And up the ladder he went. He would work on it. Their parents were busy working. She would hand him stuff. And then he had to get on the roof, and she would talk to him and hand him stuff. And he began to realize that he enjoyed working with this girl and enjoyed her company, and began to realize, she's important to me. And as more time went by, he said, "I like going over there and being with her. I don't think that I should do something to make this go away. And he realized that he liked her. Now, women always do this. She knew all of this long before he did. And he eventually said, marry me. And she said, sure. And they got married and had a family and a house. And he would get up in the morning when the sun came up, because that's when the light was there. And he would work all day and come home to his wife. They had 2 kids, and eat a supper and put the kids to bed. And then they would go to bed, and the next day would start. And she brought to his attention one day she was pregnant with her 3rd baby, and that progressed, and she brought to his attention, oh, I think I'm in labor. And she seemed to be happy. She had a smile and a sparkle in her eyes because she knew that baby was going to come out and she would have her 3rd child. And she said, I think I'm in labor. And she went on into labor, and her face reflected that she was hurting, but it was okay because she'd had a baby before. It was a little hard to have the other ones, but not bad. And the assistants were there at the house. There wasn't a board of medicine or anything like that. They helped. And as she went into labor, it became more and more painful, and she was holding his hand saying, I don't like this. This is more than it was last time. And with more time, her face changed to the face of a person where she said, I'm beginning to be a little bit afraid. And instead of holding his hand, this happens when people are medically ill and afraid. She was holding his forearm, instead of his hand, and her eyes began to look fearful. And he's like, there's not much he can do. He's not medically trained. And he noticed her eyes were beginning to lose some of their sparkle, and they weren't really moving around that much, and her grip was weakening and pretty much wasn't there anymore. And her eyes and she weren't doing anything. Now, the baby was beginning to be born. Some of the baby had come out. And as he was looking at her and this, one of the assistants came up and said, this is not going well. We will see if we can get the baby out. And they began doing work to do that, and brought to his attention, after some work, the baby is born. And he was looking at all this, and they said, she didn't make it. And he's like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, the baby had a lot of struggle, and she did too, and she didn't survive it. And the baby didn't survive it either. And he's like, what are you talking about? And he said, she's not alive anymore. And he said, that can't be. She is the source of my existence. She's the only reason I even get up in the morning. I have 2 small children. What are you trying to say? And they said, she's not alive anymore. It was more baby than she could have. And we will call the graveyard person, and he'll start working on 2 graves for her in the morning and come get her. And he just kept saying, this can't be happening. He was slipping into denial. And what we are seeing here is the problem of the pelvis and the baby and the mother in the 1600s and long time of obstetrics. Obstetrics was very dangerous because of issues like this. All right, and I'm looking. The lady has a note in her hand that says, I don't like this story. Don't do stories like this. And she also pointed at the clock. I'm out of time. So we'll stop here and start another one. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm glad you're here. We're continuing our discussion about how we can get a human mimicking robot to walk. We have been talking about the pelvis and my concern that, gosh, maybe the piston robot I created, the pelvis was a little too wide. And I thought, well, I'm going to discuss that some. And we went back in the time machine to the 1700s, the 1800s, and looked at what happens with the pelvis in humans, human female pelvis, and birth. And I'm going to do some more about that. I think we're going to get into the time machine and go up to a newer time, modern era. But before we did it, I just thought I would give you a little preview. This is a valve that I've been working on. This is the stem of the valve here. and it can rotate. So you can see that this is pink for pressure and blue for suction or return. So when the valve is in this position, number one, the pressure comes out here and the suction goes in there. And if you look inside the valve, I altered the opacity of the valve so you can see inside of it. It has these channels in here, kind of a little bow-legged. And the reason for that is to keep the separation between these so that the pressure pushing high pressure here, or well, let's see it, well, not on this one, but high pressure here, we don't want it to rupture the metal. And if you turn the valve, all right, so here the valve is in the off position, so the pressure is not connected to anything and the suction is not connected to anything. But if you continue to go and turn the valve to the number 2 position, what happens is the pressure now goes down here and the suction goes down here. And so the effect of this is, if this was controlling a hydraulic cylinder, in this position the hydraulic cylinder can't move. In this position, for example, the hydraulic cylinder would retract. But if you turned it over to here, the hydraulic cylinder would extend, because you've flipped where the pressure is and where the suction is in the hydraulic cylinder. And of course, this is a stem of metal that is press fitted into a surround of Delrin acetal. So that becomes the bushing and also the seal. If the pressure is greater, if the diameter of this is larger than the diameter of the cylindrical channel in the Delrin, then this will squeeze the Delrin, and the Delrin will squeeze back. And if the Delrin is pushing on this harder than the pressure, then it won't leak. And of course, we take a little electric motor, servo motor, digitally controlled with a gear reduction, and that turns this stem. And the effect of this is you now have a digitally controlled valve, and the digitally controlled valve is digitally controlling the extension retraction of the hydraulic cylinders. How about that? And I will probably prepare a video just on this valve. There's a way to stack these up so you can have a manifold of 6 or 7 or 8 of these, all with a common supply and return. But we're going to go to a different place right now. I always like to take a look. And what do we have today on the desktop? Tuffa in California. And I see this jagged and somewhat unfriendly. Here is me, and I'm trying to get everyone to understand about hydraulic cylinders in walking robots. So over there is the place of success where people understand it, and I just have to wander through this wilderness, I guess. But anyway, back to reality. All right, and we will continue our discussion about the pelvis. We'll move forward to the modern day. I'll just show a few of my images as I talk along. The way that labor and delivery, modern labor and delivery works now is the nurses are there in the room with the patient. They're there pretty much all the time. They go in and out maybe to take a lunch break or to get medicine or something like that, but otherwise they take care of the patient. And sometimes there's 1 or 2 or 3 nurses in there. There's 3 in this room, and one of them says, well, where is he anyway? And the other one says, well, when he's on call, he likes to be in the hospital when if he has patients in active labor. So he's probably around here somewhere. And where is that? Well, probably he's back in his call room. He's got Netflix back there, and he's also got a fetal heart rate repeater station that shows the fetal heart rate. So he's back there doing that. And she says, well, I think I'm just going to go get him. I don't know if I like what I'm seeing. And they're all like, what? And one of them, the younger nurse, says, can you do that? Go back to his call room? And the other one says, I don't know. But at this point, the other nurse has left. And she's walking down the hall, working through in her mind what her speech is to this physician and getting ready to make her case for what she thinks needs to be going on. And as she reaches her hand out to open the door to his call room, the door opens up and he's standing there in his got all of his hospital sort of clothes on. He's got his surgery hat on. He's got his little, they're sort of plasticized purple boots that cover his shoes so he can go in the operating room. He's got his mask. Frequently what they do with the mask has two straps. One goes behind the neck, one goes on the top of the head. They get the mask on, get it all straight. Then they take the top tie on the head and just pull it forward, and the mask is there on his chest, which makes it completely ready for him to do surgery in very short order. And he opens the door and is looking at her, and she's looking at him, and he says, can I help you? And she says, no. And he says to her, well, I don't know why you're back here, but if you could, maybe we'll turn around and head back up the hallway. I think we need to set that baby free. And she says, okay. And as they're walking down the hallway, she looks at him and says, set the baby free. What is that exactly? And he says, oh, C-section. He says she's not really progressing in labor. And I've seen a few fetal heart rate changes I didn't like, and I think we should go down there and talk to her and get this baby out. And she says, okay. And they go in the room. He looks at the patient and says, hello, I've been watching, following you along. You're in labor. Your body is trying hard. Nothing bad has happened, but you're not progressing in labor. There's been a couple of times where the fetal heart rate was not quite what we wanted. You don't need to feel bad or frightened, but I'm going to make the suggestion that we should get this baby out the other way. To which she says, the other way, what is that? And he's like, C-section. And she gets a little wide-eyed and looks at the father of the baby and looks back at him and has a few questions, which he answers. And the nurses have been working with this guy for a long time. They know what's going on. They knew when he walked in the room what his plan was. And they had started. There's a lot to do. Get the medicines ready, get the IV, make sure it's flowing well and taped well. And pre-op meds are there and all the parts are there and the stretcher's there. And they're bustling about and look at the surgeon, I guess, or the OB doctor and say, listen, maybe if you could sit out at the nurse's station, we got a lot to do. We got to get her undressed and into a clean gown. And this is a secret nursing code phrase for you need to not be in here for a little while. And this is because the patient has 1,000 questions. And she'll talk to the surgeon, but she won't ask all those questions to the doctor. She'll ask it to the nurses. And so he eases himself out to the nurse's station and starts doing his paperwork. And they start getting her ready for her C-section. Eventually, the whole crowd comes out, and the patient and the granddad-to-be and the grandma-to-be and the father of the baby-to-be and the patient, and the surgeon stands up and says to Granddad, put your fingers on her forehead and tell her you'll see her in a little while. And Grandma, you do that too. And father of the baby, now are you going with her or not? And she sort of has this vice grip on his hand. And most of the time she says, yeah, he's going. And they all get together and head downstairs for the C-section. And she has her C-section. They show her the baby there in the operating room. And the baby goes upstairs. They finish the C-section, and she goes upstairs, and she had a C-section, and nothing went wrong. She didn't get a big blood clot in her pelvis. She didn't get an infection in her pelvis. She didn't get an infection that got worse, and she began to feel dizzy and passed out and was taken to the intensive care unit because she was septic, and woke up 5 days later and said, "Where am I?" And they said, "You're in the intensive care unit." And they showed her her 5-day-old baby, of which she remembers nothing. They've been caring for the baby there in the nursery at the hospital while they worked to save her. And none of that happened. She just had a C-section and went home. And she went home on the second day, just like the people that had a vaginal delivery went home. She does have a C-section scar. And it may be that she is going to have to reconsider what her bikini looks like, and if she might need to get a new bikini. But otherwise, she had a baby, she had a C-section, and this is modern American or Western civilization obstetrical medical care, with the pelvis taking care of the problems from the pelvis that was given to us, of which the lady watching looked at me and said, "She is done with her case and you are done with your video." And that means I'm out of time. And so we're going to have to wrap it up and start another video. I thought it was kind of interesting. Our next step is going to be traveling in the spaceship supplied to us by Google Earth.